The transport pod descended through Arizona's crystalline morning sky like a falling star that had forgotten how to burn. Colonel Garrett Ashford stood on the tarmac of Edwards Air Force Base, squinting against the January sun, watching the vessel's descent with the practiced patience of a man who had spent 20 years waiting for things that mattered. The pod touched down with barely a whisper, hydraulics sighing as if the machine itself understood the weight of what it carried. He had been briefed, of course. War bride, alliance protocol, diplomatic necessity wrapped in the language of peace. The words had meant little in the sterile conference room where General Vance had laid out the assignment with all the warmth of a man reading warranty instructions. But standing here, watching the hatch spiral open with mechanical precision, Garrett felt something shift in his chest, something he couldn't name. She emerged like a dream rendered in flesh and physics. Tall, impossibly so, with skin that caught the light in shades of green, like sunlight through new leaves or the heart of an emerald held aflame. Her hair fell in a cascade of pure black, straight and heavy, past shoulders that carried themselves with a dignity that made the air around her seem formal. But it was her ears that stopped his breath, elongated and tapering to elegant points, almost translucent at the tips, catching the desert wind like sails designed for navigating invisible currents. And the chains. Silver intricate beyond any craftsmanship he had seen in 4 decades of life, they encircled her wrists and ankles with a delicacy that seemed to mock their purpose. Each link was engraved with symbols he couldn't read, patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. They caught the light and threw it back in fractured rainbows. They sang softly with each step she took, a sound like wind through crystal or distant bells calling across water. She walked down the ramp with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. Each footfall deliberate, each shift of weight a calculated grace. The chains moved with her, not dragging or restraining, but flowing like extensions of her body, like additional limbs whose purpose he couldn't fathom. "I am Seraphis," she said, and her voice was music shaped into language, each syllable weighted with harmonics that made his military-issue translation implant work overtime to capture meaning beyond mere words. "I serve the Alliance. I serve the peace." Garrett swallowed, suddenly aware of how rough his own voice would sound in comparison. "Colonel Garrett Ashford, welcome to Earth. Welcome to—" He gestured vaguely at the sprawling base, the distant mountains, the whole impossible situation. "Welcome." Her eyes found his, and they were the color of new growth, of things that had learned to thrive in alien soil. There was intelligence there, sharp and assessing, but also something else. Amusement, perhaps, or pity for his obvious discomfort. "You are troubled by the chains," she said, not a question. "I'm troubled by the idea of anyone in chains," he replied, trying for honesty because lies seemed impossible in the face of that steady gaze. The corner of her mouth lifted, just barely. "Your trouble is noted, and misplaced." Before he could respond, she moved past him with that same deliberate grace, the silver links creating their quiet music, leaving him to follow in her wake like a student who had already failed the first test. The quarters assigned to her were in the officer's wing, a room that had been hastily cleared and furnished with what the base commander had nervously called appropriate accommodations. Garrett opened the door for her, watched as she stepped inside and surveyed the space with the same careful attention she seemed to give everything. Her gaze lingered on the bed, the desk, the window overlooking the desert expanse beyond the fence line. "It will suffice," she said, and moved to the window, chains pulling slightly on the floor as she stood motionless, looking out at the landscape. Garrett cleared his throat. "If you need anything, anything at all." "I need you to understand," she said without turning, "that these chains are not what you believe them to be." "Then help me understand." Now she turned, and the light from the window made her skin glow as if lit from within. "In time, Colonel. For now, I require rest. The crossing was long, and your world's gravity sits differently than my own." He nodded, backing toward the door, feeling dismissed and oddly grateful for it. "I'll be outside if you need me." "I will not need you tonight," she said, and there was kindness in her voice, the kind reserved for well-meaning fools. He closed the door and stood in the hallway, listening to the silence, wondering what he had gotten himself into. Sleep did not come easily that night. Garrett lay in his own quarters, 3 doors down, staring at the ceiling, thinking about chains and the woman who wore them like jewelry. His mind kept circling back to the wrongness of it, the fundamental injustice. No matter what she said, no matter how she carried herself, the sight of those restraints made something hot and angry coil in his gut. Margaret would have known what to say. His wife, 3 years gone to cancer that had eaten her from the inside while he held her hand and pretended strength, she would have seen through to the truth with that clear-eyed wisdom she had possessed. But Margaret was ash scattered over the Grand Canyon, and he was alone with his convictions and his certainty that he knew what freedom looked like. At 2 in the morning, he made his decision. He moved quietly through the hallway, years of military discipline making his footsteps silent on the tile floor. Her door was unlocked. He eased it open, breath held, and stepped into darkness barely touched by starlight from the window. Seraphis slept on her side, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, the chains draped across her body like silver serpents at rest. In sleep, her face lost some of its formality, became younger, almost vulnerable. For a moment, Garrett hesitated, wondering if he was about to make a terrible mistake, but the chains glinted in the dimness, and his resolve hardened. The locks were intricate but not impossible. He had studied them during the transport, memorized the mechanisms with the careful attention he had once given to weapons systems and tactical deployments. His fingers worked in silence, finding the pressure points, the hidden releases, first the right wrist, then the left. The ankle chains took longer, required him to move with aching slowness to avoid waking her, but eventually they too yielded. He gathered them carefully, feeling their unexpected warmth, the way they seemed to hum with something more than mere metal. He placed them on the desk, arranged them in a neat coil, and left a note beside them written in careful block letters. "You are free now. No one should live in chains." He left as quietly as he had come, closing the door with a soft click, feeling righteous and relieved in equal measure. The scream brought him bolt upright from the shallow sleep he had finally fallen into as dawn broke. It was not a scream of pain or fear. It was something worse. Grief, raw and primal, the sound of something essential being torn away. Garrett was out of bed and running before conscious thought caught up with instinct, his heart hammering against his ribs. He burst through her door to find Seraphis on the floor beside the desk, her hands hovering over the chains but not touching them, her whole body trembling. She had been searching, he realized. The room showed signs of frantic movement, cushions displaced, bedding thrown aside, the desperate hunt of someone who had lost something irreplaceable. When she looked up at him, her eyes were wild, unfocused, and in them he saw something that made his stomach drop. Not anger, terror. "Where are they?" Her voice cracked on the words. Music turned to broken glass. "What have you done? Where are my chains?" He pointed mutely to the desk, unable to speak past the sudden understanding that he had made a catastrophic error. She lunged for them, gathered them to her chest with a sound that was half sob, half prayer. Her fingers traced the links with desperate tenderness, checking each one as if counting children after a disaster. "Intact," she whispered. "Still intact. Still whole." "I thought," Garrett began, but she cut him off with a look that could have stripped paint. "You thought." The words were acid. "You thought you knew what I needed. You thought your understanding of freedom superseded my own. You thought your mercy was greater than my choice. I was trying to help. Then help me now." She held out the chains with shaking hands, and he saw tears tracking down her green skin, leaving trails that caught the early light. "Please put them back. I am not whole without them. I am not myself. Please." The word, raw with need, broke something in him. He knelt beside her, taking the chains with hands that had suddenly forgotten how to be steady. "I don't know the ritual. I don't know how. I will guide you." Her voice was calmer now, but fragile, like glass held together by will alone. "Right wrist first. The clasp aligns with the pulse point. Yes, there. Now speak the words I give you, in luminary first, then your tongue." She spoke syllables that his implant struggled to parse, sounds that seemed to carry weight beyond language. He repeated them clumsily, feeling foolish and small. But her eyes closed in something like relief as the first lock engaged. "I bind myself to loyalty," she translated, her voice steadying. "I choose this chain freely." Left wrist. More words, more meaning he couldn't fully grasp. Her breathing began to even out. I bind myself to duty. I choose this chain freely. The ankle chains were last, and by the time he secured the final lock, his hands were cramping and his throat was tight with emotions he couldn't name. She sat perfectly still throughout, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer or meditation or something beyond his understanding. When it was done, when all four chains were back in place, something extraordinary happened. They began to glow. Soft at first, just a warming of the silver, but growing steadily brighter until each chain pulsed with gentle light, rhythmic and regular. It took him a moment to recognize the pattern. Her heartbeat. The chains were synchronized to her pulse, glowing and fading in time with the life moving through her veins. Seraphis opened her eyes, and the wildness was gone, replaced by a calm so profound it seemed to radiate outward like heat. She looked at the glowing chains, then at him, and something in her expression softened. "You see now," she said quietly, "they are not metal. They are not restraint. They are alive, Colonel Ashford. They are part of me. Removing them was like removing my lungs and expecting me to breathe." He sat back on his heels, staring at the pulsing light, understanding nothing and everything simultaneously. "I'm sorry, God, I'm so sorry. Your sorrow is accepted. Your lesson is learned." She stood, fluid and graceful once more, metal whispering against metal as she moved. "Rest now. Tomorrow I will begin to teach you what these chains truly mean, if you wish to learn." "I do," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. She nodded once, regal as a queen granting mercy, and moved to the window as the sun crested the horizon, painting the desert gold and red and impossible orange. The chains caught the light and scattered it in patterns across the walls, like prayers made visible. Garrett left her there, closed the door, and leaned against the hallway wall, his legs suddenly uncertain. He had thought he was saving her. He had been so certain, so confident in his understanding of right and wrong, freedom and captivity. He had been a fool, but fools, he thought, could learn. And he had just been given a second chance to do exactly that. The days that followed were an education in humility. Seraphis moved through the base with that same measured grace, and Garrett found himself watching her constantly, trying to decode the language of the chains. They sang with every step, a soft percussion that seemed to mark time in ways the standard issue chronometers never could. Other personnel stared, whispered, but she ignored them with the easy dismissal of someone who had endured worse scrutiny. On the third day, she invited him to observe her morning ritual. He entered her quarters at dawn to find her in the center of the room, standing perfectly still, eyes closed. The chains hung motionless despite her breathing, as if they existed in some space adjacent to physics. As he watched, she began to move. It was not dance, though it shared dance's fluidity. It was not combat training, though there was martial precision in every gesture. Her arms swept through complex patterns, the chains following trajectories that seemed impossible, wrapping and unwrapping, creating geometries in the air that his eyes struggled to track. The sound they made was no longer simple percussion, but a symphony of tones, high and low, resonating with something deeper than hearing. She moved for 20 minutes without pause, without apparent effort, and when she finally stilled, lowering her arms slowly to her sides, the chains settled against her skin with a final harmonic that seemed to linger in the air like incense. Her eyes opened, finding him immediately, though he had not made a sound. "This is meditation," she said, not breathless, despite the exertion. "This is how I remember who I am, who I chose to become." "Chosen," he echoed, latching on to the word. "You keep saying that, chosen, because it is the foundation of everything." She moved to the chair by the window, gestured for him to take the one opposite. "I was not born with these chains, Colonel. I was born free as your people understand freedom. Unbound, unlimited. And for the first 18 years of my life, I lived that way." She looked down at the chains on her wrists, touched them with something approaching tenderness. Then came the war. My people and yours, approaching each other across the stars, neither understanding the other, both armed and afraid. The alliance required bridges, volunteers to cross the gap and become living symbols of trust. "War brides," Garrett said quietly. "Yes, the tradition is old among the luminary. In times of great need, Those willing to sacrifice personal freedom for collective peace step forward. They take the oath chains. They bind themselves to service, to diplomacy, to becoming the bridge their people need. But you're so young, a smile ghosted across her lips. I was 20 when I volunteered, old enough to understand what I was choosing, young enough to bear the weight for years to come. Why? The question burst from him. Why would you do that? Seraphis was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. I had a sister, Kyrielle, younger by 3 years, brilliant and beautiful and fragile in ways I never was. When the call came for volunteers, she stepped forward. She wanted to serve. She wanted to matter. The rhythm of her vows made audible as Seraphis shifted in her chair. But I knew she would break. The training alone would have destroyed her, let alone the decades of service required. So I stepped forward in her place. I took the chains she would have worn. I made the vows she would have spoken. That's not freedom, Garrett said, hearing the roughness in his own voice. That's sacrifice. Yes, Seraphis agreed, and her smile was sad and knowing. It is sacrifice, chosen sacrifice, the most powerful kind of freedom there is. The freedom to say, I will bear this burden so another does not have to. Can you truly not understand that, Colonel? You who wear a dead woman's ring 3 years after her passing? His hand went involuntarily to the gold band on his left hand, the metal worn smooth by years of unconscious touching. Margaret's gift, given the day they married, kept close even after the divorce papers that had arrived 6 months before her diagnosis, returned unopened because some promises ran deeper than legal documents. That's different, he said, but the words were weak even to his own ears. Is it? You could remove that ring at any moment. Nothing binds you to it but choice and memory and the meaning you have given it. My chains are the same, Colonel. They are memory made manifest. They are choice worn on the body instead of hidden in the heart. Before he could respond, an alert chimed through the base-wide comm system. General Vance's voice, clipped and professional. Colonel Ashford to the briefing room. We have a situation. Garrett stood, uncertain whether to be relieved or disappointed by the interruption. Seraphis rose with him, chains settling into their patterns around her limbs. Will you come? He asked. I serve the Alliance, she said simply. Where you go, I follow. That is the nature of my chains. The briefing room was already crowded when they arrived. Officers in various states of alertness, pulled from morning routines by whatever crisis had erupted. General Vance stood at the head of the table, his expression carved from granite. Mining colony, Montana. Structural failure in the primary excavation shaft. Automated systems are offline. We have 23 personnel trapped below the collapse, limited oxygen, and the civilian contractors are screaming for military intervention. He pulled up holographic schematics, red zones pulsing where the disaster had occurred. Colonel Ashford, you're our liaison specialist. This is a perfect opportunity to demonstrate Alliance cooperation. You and the Luminary representative will deploy immediately. Show everyone that this partnership means something. Garrett felt Seraphis stiffen beside him, the chains giving a single sharp note that no one else seemed to hear. General, with respect, I'm not sure. Not sure of what, Colonel? This is exactly the kind of mission the Alliance was formed to handle. Or do you doubt our guests' capabilities? Every eye in the room turned to Seraphis. She stood perfectly still, perfectly poised, and when she spoke, her voice carried no trace of the vulnerability Garrett had witnessed in her quarters. I am capable, General Vance. The chains do not limit me. If Colonel Ashford requires my assistance, I am honored to provide it. And there was nothing Garrett could say that wouldn't sound like doubt or worse, like condescension. He nodded once, sharp and military. Wheels up in 30. The flight to Montana gave him time to study her in a new context. Seraphis sat in the transport's jump seat, strapped in with the casual competence of someone who had done this countless times before. The chains lay quiet against her flight suit, dulled slightly by the matte black fabric, but still catching stray reflections from the instrument panels. Have you done rescue operations before? He asked over the engine in underone. I have done whatever was required of me, she replied, not looking away from the window. Rescue, negotiation, combat when necessary. The chains do not choose my duties, Colonel. They simply remind me of why I perform them. And that's enough? Reminders? Now she did look at him, and there was something ancient in her gaze despite her youth. What drives you, Colonel Ashford? What makes you rise each morning and put on that uniform? Duty, honor, memory of a woman who died believing you would continue to serve something larger than yourself? He flinched and she nodded as if he had confirmed something. We are not so different, you and I. We both wear our commitments where others can see them. You in cloth and insignia, me in silver and oath. The only difference is that I have made peace with the weight. The mining colony was a scar on the Montana landscape. All exposed rock and industrial machinery, steam rising from vents in the frozen ground. They touched down in a zone cleared by panicked workers, and Garrett could see the desperation in every face that turned toward them. The site supervisor was a woman named Rebecca Hartley, weathered and competent, her eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness, or tears, or both. Thank God. We've got 23 down there, oxygen running out in maybe 4 hours, and every structural analysis says the whole damn shaft could collapse if we try to dig from above. Seraphis stepped forward, silver links singing in the cold air, and Rebecca's eyes went wide. What the hell is that? Alliance representative, Garrett said quickly. She's here to help. She's chained up like a prisoner, and you brought her to a rescue operation? I am neither prisoner nor decoration, Seraphis said, her voice cutting through the rising tension with surgical precision. Show me the schematics. Tell me what you know about the collapse. I will tell you how to save your people. Rebecca hesitated, then something in Seraphis's absolute certainty made the decision for her. She pulled up a tablet, displayed the underground layout. Here, main shaft. Secondary support columns failed during a seismic event. The collapse is unstable. Every time we try to clear debris, more comes down. Seraphis studied the display with the focused intensity Garrett was coming to recognize. Her fingers, encircled by their delicate chains, traced patterns on the screen that seemed random until he realized she was mapping stress points, calculating load distributions with nothing but eyesight and intuition. There, she said, pointing to a tertiary access tunnel. This shaft connects to the service level above the collapse. If you route through here, avoiding the primary load-bearing areas, you can reach the trapped personnel without triggering further structural failure. Rebecca stared. That tunnel is barely 3 feet in diameter. We can't get equipment through there. You do not need equipment. You need someone small enough to navigate the space and strong enough to guide others through. Seraphis began removing her flight suit, revealing the form-fitting underlay beneath, and the chains that no longer seemed decorative but functional, purpose-built for exactly this kind of impossible task. You're insane, Rebecca said. I am committed, Seraphis corrected. There is a difference. Garrett found his voice. I'm going with you. You will slow me down. Your human frame is not built for confined spaces, and your experience in zero-visibility rescue is limited. She met his eyes, and there was no cruelty in her denial, only fact. I go alone. You coordinate from here. Trust me to do what I was trained to do. Every instinct screamed against it, but he forced himself to nod. Be careful. Careful is for those who have something to lose. I have already given everything I could give. She touched his shoulder briefly, the chains on her wrist cold even through his jacket. I will bring them home, Colonel. This I vow. And then she was moving, descending into the access shaft with a grace that made the impossible look easy. The chains caught the light from their helmet lamps, turned her into something luminous and otherworldly, and then the darkness swallowed her whole. The next 3 hours were the longest of Garrett's life. They tracked her progress through suit telemetry, watching the vital signs stay steady even as she crawled through spaces that would have induced claustrophobia in anyone else. Rebecca coordinated with her team, running calculations, recalculating margins of safety that grew thinner with every passing minute. She's reached the collapse zone, Rebecca reported, voice tight. Atmospheric readings show, Christ, less than 40 minutes of air left down there. Garrett listened to Seraphis's breathing over the comm, steady and controlled, and heard something else beneath it. The chains. They were creating harmonics in the enclosed space, and he realized with sudden clarity that she was using them for echolocation, mapping the unstable debris field with sound the way bats navigated darkness. I have visual on the trapped personnel, Seraphis's voice came through, calm as still water. 23 confirmed, several injuries, none critical, beginning extraction protocol. Negative, Rebecca cut in. The structural integrity won't hold if you try to move them. You need to wait for reinforcement. There is no time for reinforcement. I will stabilize the collapse and guide them through. Prepare your medical teams for immediate triage. That's suicide. You can't hold back a collapse by yourself. Silence on the line. Then, Colonel Ashford, do you trust me? Every eye in the command center turned to him. He thought about chains that glowed with heartbeats, about vows spoken in darkness, about a woman who had chosen her bonds and worn them with such absolute conviction that he had needed to see her broken before he could begin to understand her strength. I trust you, he said, and meant it with a certainty that surprised him. Then bear witness to what these chains truly mean. What happened next, they would piece together later from suit recordings and the shell-shocked testimony of the miners. Seraphis positioned herself beneath the most unstable section of the collapse, and the chains began to glow. Not the gentle pulse of a heartbeat, but something fierce and bright, energy bleeding into the physical world from somewhere beyond standard physics. She raised her arms, and the chains extended, impossibly, stretching like liquid metal to brace against the surrounding rock. They became pillars of light, supporting tons of stone and earth that should have crushed her, holding an impossible weight through sheer force of will made manifest. Go, she commanded the miners, her voice strained for the first time. Now, I cannot hold this long. They went, stumbling and scrambling through the path she had cleared, lives threading through the needle of her sacrifice. Rebecca coordinated their ascent, calling off numbers, each one a small victory against the crushing weight of probability. 18, 19, 20. Garrett watched the telemetry, saw Seraphis's vitals spiking, pushing beyond safe limits. Get out of there, he said into the comm. Leave them. Save yourself. Never, she gasped. 21, 22. The last miner cleared the collapse zone. 23, all accounted for. Seraphis, collapse the support now. Get out. Attempting. Her breathing was ragged, each word an effort. The chains, they do not wish to. Release. Garrett's blood turned to ice. What does that mean? It means they have bonded with the structure. To release them is to release the collapse. I must choose. Then choose yourself, damn it. A sound came over the comm that might have been laughter or might have been sobbing. I chose myself, long ago, when I put these chains on. This is not sacrifice. This is completion. No, the word tore from him. No, you don't get to do this. You don't get to make me understand what those chains mean and then die wearing them. That's not fair. Fair, she echoed, and now there was definitely laughter in her voice, bright and broken. Colonel, life is not fair, but choices are everything. The telemetry spiked, the vitals went critical. And then, like a miracle or a curse or something beyond the capacity of either word to contain, the reading stabilized. I have found the release. I am coming home. She emerged from the shaft 17 minutes later, covered in dust, the chains dulled to gray by stone powder, but intact. She collapsed into Garrett's arms, and he caught her without thinking, lowered her carefully to the frozen ground, feeling the chains cold against his skin, even through his gloves. Her eyes fluttered open, found his face, and she smiled with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion into something soul-deep. Do you understand now, she whispered. These chains are not my prison. They are my wings. He looked at the miners being loaded into medical transports, all alive, all breathing, because this woman had chosen to wear silver bonds that made her stronger than any free person could ever be. I'm beginning to, he said. She closed her eyes, still smiling, and let unconsciousness take her with the trust of someone who knew she would wake again. They flew back to Arizona in silence, Seraphis sleeping in the medical bay, monitors tracking vitals that slowly returned to normal ranges. Garrett sat beside her, watching the chains that had saved lives glow softly in time with her healing heart, and felt the last of his certainty crumble into something more honest. Something like humility. He had thought freedom meant the absence of bonds. He had thought he knew what liberation looked like. He had been wrong about everything that mattered, and standing on the edge of that wrongness, looking down into the depth of his own ignorance, Colonel Garrett Ashford made a choice. He would learn. He would listen. He would let this woman who wore chains like angels wore halos teach him what it meant to choose your bonds instead of having them chosen for you. It was a beginning, not of understanding, not yet, but of the willingness to be taught. And in the silence of the transport, with Montana falling away beneath them and the desert waiting ahead, Seraphis's chains caught the setting sun and threw light across the walls like promises written in a language he was only just learning to read. February arrived with unseasonable warmth, the Arizona desert blooming in defiance of the calendar. Garrett had spent the week since Montana watching Seraphis with new eyes, seeing patterns he had missed before. The way she touched the chains each morning before rising, fingers tracing the engravings like a musician tuning an instrument. The way she stood perfectly still for exactly 3 minutes before entering any room that held more than 5 people, as if gathering herself or perhaps offering some silent prayer to whatever gods the luminary acknowledged. The way she never, ever asked for anything she needed, but accepted what was offered with a grace that made generosity feel like privilege. He had also noticed how others looked at her, the younger personnel with curiosity barely restrained. The older officers with something harder, something that looked uncomfortably like judgment, wearing the mask of concern. And General Vance with an expression Garrett had seen before, in mission briefings where collateral damage was discussed in abstract numbers rather than human costs. The call came on the first Tuesday of the month, crisp and official. Alliance Summit, Phoenix Convention Center, early February. Your presence is required, Colonel. Both of you. Garrett's stomach tightened at the phrasing. Your presence. As if Seraphis were equipment to be requisitioned rather than a person to be consulted. He found her in the training facility, moving through a form that was half combat drill and half meditation, the chains creating arcs of silver light as she flowed from stance to stance. She finished the sequence before acknowledging him, bringing her hands together in a gesture that made the wrist chains sing in perfect unison. We have been summoned, she said, not a question. How did you know? I've been summoned many times, Colonel. I recognize the quality of silence that precedes such announcements. She collected a towel, pressed it to her face, and when she lowered it, her expression was carefully neutral. They will ask me to remove the chains. You can refuse. Can I? She moved past him toward the changing rooms, and he followed, unwilling to let the conversation end. You forget, Colonel, that I am here as a symbol. Symbols do not have the luxury of refusal without consequences. Then I'll refuse for you. She stopped, turned, and the look she gave him was complicated with emotions he couldn't parse. You would stand against your own chain of command for mine? I would stand for what's right. Right, she echoed, and there was something bitter in the word. Your people have such confidence in your ability to define that term. My people learned long ago that right is a direction, not a destination. It must be chosen continuously, in each moment, or it becomes merely the memory of righteousness rather than the practice of it. The Phoenix Convention Center was a monument to human ambition, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky, as if trying to escape the desert that birthed it. Inside, the climate control fought a losing battle against the combined body heat of diplomats, military brass, and representatives from a dozen allied species. Garrett kept close to Seraphis as they navigated the crowds, acutely aware of how the chains drew every eye, turned every head. The main conference hall was arranged in concentric circles, humanity's delegation at the center, allied species radiating outward in order of treaty seniority. Seraphis took her assigned position with the other luminary representatives, 3 others who wore similar chains, though none quite as ornate as hers. Garrett noticed how they exchanged glances, a silent communication that needed no translation technology. General Vance opened the proceedings with the practiced efficiency of a man who had run 1,000 such meetings. Reports on trade, updates on territorial boundaries, the mundane machinery of alliance maintenance. Garrett tried to pay attention, but found his focus continually drawn to Seraphis, the way she sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, chains pooled around her wrists like captured moonlight. 2 hours in, the agenda shifted. Item 7, Vance announced. Cultural integration protocols and symbolic gestures toward unified identity. Ambassador Whitmore rose, a tall man with silver hair and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Garrett had dealt with him before, knew him for a career politician who measured every word for maximum advantage and minimum sincerity. General Vance, esteemed colleagues, Whitmore began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of rehearsed sincerity. We stand at a crossroads of history. The alliance between our species represents humanity's greatest achievement, a bridge across the stars built on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. But symbols matter, optics matter, and we must ask ourselves what message we send when our luminary partners appear before the public in restraints. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Garrett felt his jaw tighten. These chains, Whitmore continued, gesturing toward the luminary delegation, however traditional, however culturally significant, read to the human eye as bondage, as subjugation. They undermine the very equality we claim to champion. I propose, with the utmost respect, that our luminary colleagues consider removing these symbols of an outdated tradition, that they embrace the freedom we offer and show the galaxy that this alliance is built on liberation, not limitation. The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Seraphis rose, and Garrett saw something in her posture that made his breath catch. Not anger, not fear, something colder and more dangerous. Absolute clarity. "Ambassador Whitmore," she said, and her voice carried across the hall without need for amplification, each word precise as a surgical instrument. "You speak of symbols and optics. You speak of messages sent. Allow me to clarify the message these chains send, since you appear to have misread it entirely." She raised her hands, let the chains catch the light, turned them so every eye could see the intricate engravings, the way they seemed to pulse with internal luminescence. "These are oath chains. Each link represents a vow I made freehold at the age of 20 when I stepped forward to become what my people needed. Not because I was forced, not because I had no choice, but because I looked at my sister, my family, my world, and said, I will bear this weight so others do not have to." Her voice never rose, but it filled the space like floodwater, inexorable and absolute. "You call them symbols of bondage. I call them symbols of choice, the most profound choice any being can make, to bind oneself willingly to something greater than mere personal desire. You speak of freedom as if it means the absence of commitment. My people understand that true freedom is the power to choose your commitments and honor them even when honoring them is hard." She took a step forward, the familiar percussion of her bonds marking the movement, and Whitmore actually flinched. "You offer me liberation from these chains. I offer you understanding that liberation and freedom are not synonyms. Liberation is what you grant to prisoners. Freedom is what you claim for yourself. I am not your prisoner, Ambassador. I am not your symbol to reshape into more comfortable imagery. I am a luminary warrior who chose these chains, who earned these chains, who will wear these chains until the day my service ends or my life does, whichever comes first." The silence now was different, charged with something electric. General Vance stood, his face carefully controlled. "Representative Seraphis, with all due respect." "No," Garrett heard himself say, the word escaping before conscious thought could stop it. Every eye turned to him. "No," he repeated, louder now, feeling his career disintegrate in real time and not caring at all. "General, with respect, you don't get to do this. You don't get to ask her to change who she is because it makes better optics for the evening news." Vance's expression could have frozen nitrogen. "Colonel Ashford, you are out of line." "Then consider me permanently out of line, sir, because I've spent the last month learning what those chains mean. I've watched her save lives while wearing them. I've seen her meditation, her discipline, her absolute commitment to being exactly who she chose to become. And if this alliance means asking her to be less than that for the sake of making us comfortable, then maybe we don't deserve the alliance at all. Colonel, you are relieved of duty pending a formal review." "Understood, sir." Garrett met Seraphis's eyes across the distance, saw something in them that might have been gratitude, or might have been sorrow, or might have been both. Worth it, the proceedings dissolved into chaos after that, voices rising in argument, delegations conferring in urgent whispers. Garrett was escorted from the hall by 2 MPs who looked deeply uncomfortable with the assignment, and he went without resistance, feeling strangely light despite the weight of what he had just done. They held him in a conference room for 3 hours, no charges filed but no freedom granted. Through the window, he could see the sun tracking across the sky, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. He thought about Margaret, wondered what she would say about him throwing away 20 years of service for a principle he couldn't even fully articulate. Thought she might approve. Thought that maybe, finally, he was learning what it meant to choose his chains rather than simply accepting the ones handed to him. The door opened. Seraphis entered alone, and the MPs closed the door behind her with the discretion of people who understood they were witnessing something beyond their pay grade. She stood looking at him for a longer moment, chains gleaming in the artificial light. "You should not have done that," she said finally. "Probably not. You have destroyed your career, your standing, your future within the military structure you have served your entire adult life." "Yeah. Why?" He stood, faced her across the generic conference table with its plastic chairs and government-issue motivational posters. "Because you were right. About choices, about commitments, about the difference between liberation and freedom. And because watching you stand there and speak your truth made me realize I've been letting other people define mine for too long." She moved around the table, came close enough that he could see the fine details of the chain engravings, mathematical formulae and poetry intertwined in ways that hurt to look at directly. "They will court-martial you," she said softly. "Maybe. They will discharge you dishonorably. Possibly. You will lose everything you have built. I lost everything that mattered 3 years ago when Margaret died. Everything since has just been going through motions, pretending the uniform meant what it used to mean." He reached out, stopped just short of touching the chains on her wrist. "You showed me what it looks like to choose meaning instead of accepting it. I'm just trying to follow that example." Her hand moved, covered his, pressed it against the chains. They were warm, almost hot, and he felt something pulse through them that might have been her heartbeat or might have been something older, something that existed before heartbeats were invented. "You defended my right to choose," she whispered. "No one has ever done that before. They have respected my choice, yes, honored it, but never defended it against those who would take it from me. Do you understand what that means to me?" "I'm beginning to." She smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look young and ancient simultaneously. "You are learning, Colonel Garrett Ashford. Slowly, clumsily, but you are learning. Best teacher I ever had." The moment held, fragile and profound, and then shattered as the door burst open. General Vance stood in the doorway, his expression carved from decades of military discipline barely containing volcanic fury. "Colonel Ashford, you are formally reprimanded and reassigned to advisory duties pending a full review. You will have no operational authority. You will not represent this base in any official capacity. You will not interfere in Alliance protocols again. Am I understood?" "Yes, sir." Representative Seraphis. Vance's tone shifted, became almost gentle, and that scared Garrett more than the anger had. "The Council has made a decision. We respect your cultural traditions. We respect your choice, but we cannot allow the optics of your chains to undermine the Alliance's public perception. You will be reassigned to cultural liaison duties. No more field operations. No more public appearances. You will serve the Alliance from behind closed doors where your traditions will not cause further controversy." Seraphis stood perfectly still, and Garrett watched her face become a mask, every emotion locked down behind layers of discipline he couldn't begin to penetrate. "I understand, General," she said, her voice empty of everything that made it music. "Good, then we're done here." He left, the door closed, and in the silence that remained, Garrett watched something die in Seraphis's eyes. Watched the chains dim from glowing silver to dull metal, as if the light inside her had been switched off at the source. "Seraphis," he said. "Do not," she whispered. "Do not offer comfort. Do not tell me it will be acceptable. They have caged me more effectively than removing the chains ever could. They have made my choice meaningless by hiding it from view. Then we fight it. How? You have no authority. I have no voice. We are both prisoners now, Colonel. The only difference is that you are still learning to feel your chains, while I have worn mine long enough to know exactly how they cut." The weeks that followed were gray, drained of color and meaning. Seraphis was assigned to an office in the base's administrative building, tasked with translating luminary cultural documents and answering questions about protocol from people who would never actually need the information. Garrett, stripped of operational duties, pushed papers, and attended meetings where his input was neither requested nor acknowledged. They saw each other rarely, passing in hallways with nods that carried the weight of everything unsaid. He threw himself into research, spending sleepless nights reading everything he could find about luminary culture, chain traditions, the history of war brides, and oath bonds. The more he learned, the more he understood how profoundly the Alliance had misunderstood what they were asking when they wanted the chains hidden. It wasn't just tradition. It wasn't just symbolism. The chains were a language, a method of being in the world. Wearing them in private was like asking a poet to compose verses no one would ever hear, asking a painter to create masterpieces locked in darkness. The chains existed to be seen, to be witnessed, to communicate through their presence that some beings chose duty over ease and found freedom in that choice. Hiding them didn't preserve their meaning. It destroyed it. Mid-February brought the Nevada mission, and Garrett only learned about it because he still had access to operational briefings despite having no authority to act on them. Automated mining station on an asteroid in near-Earth orbit. Equipment malfunction in zero-gravity environment. Technical specialists needed for repairs. Seraphis had been requested specifically, her unique abilities with the chains making her ideal for the delicate work. But the mission brief included a clause that made Garrett's blood run cold. Representative will perform duties with minimal visibility to avoid public relations complications. He found her in her quarters, packing minimal gear with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had stopped caring about outcomes. "You can't do this," he said without preamble. She didn't look up from her packing. "I can. I will. I have no choice." "You always have a choice, Duoa." Now she did look at him, and her eyes were empty in ways that hurt to witness. "If I refuse, I break my vows. I fail to serve. The chains become ornamental rather than operational. If I comply, I validate their belief that the chains are removable, negotiable, optional. Either way, I lose. Then lose in a way that's true to who you are." "And who am I, Colonel? The warrior who wore chains with pride?" "She died in Phoenix when they locked her in an office and told her to be quiet. I am what remains. A translator, a cultural footnote, a symbol rendered meaningless by being hidden from view." He wanted to argue, wanted to find words that would penetrate the shell of her despair. But before he could speak, the alert sounded. Mission launch in 2 hours. The transport was smaller than the Montana flight, just Seraphis, a pilot, and a minimal support crew. Garrett watched from the observation deck as they prepped, saw her moving through the pre-flight checks with chains still in place, still glowing faintly. Still part of her, regardless of what the mission parameters demanded. He made a decision then, the kind that couldn't be unmade, the kind that redefined everything that came after. He ran, through corridors, taking stairs 3 at a time, his aging body protesting, but his will overriding every physical complaint. He reached the launch pad just as they were beginning final boarding. The pilot already in position, Seraphis standing at the base of the ramp. "Seraphis, wait!" She turned and something flickered in her expression. Hope, maybe, or just surprise that anyone cared enough to interrupt. He reached her, breathing hard, knowing he had maybe 30 seconds before security arrived. "Don't hide them. Whatever they ask, whatever they threaten, don't hide the chains. They're not negotiable. You taught me that. They're who you are. I told you I have no choice. You have the only choice that matters, the same one you made when you were 20, to be who you choose to be, regardless of what others demand." He grabbed her hands, felt the chains warm against his palms. "I'm asking you to choose yourself. Choose the meaning you gave to these bonds. Choose to honor your vows by keeping them visible, operational, real. They will ground me, end my service. Then your service will end with honor instead of shame. Isn't that what the chains are supposed to represent?" Security was running toward them, voices calling for him to stand down, but he ignored them, focused entirely on her face, watching something shift behind her eyes. "You ask me to sacrifice everything," she said quietly. "I'm asking you to sacrifice nothing. I'm asking you to hold on to the one thing that matters. The rest is just noise." The security team arrived, grabbed his arms, started pulling him away. He didn't resist, just kept his eyes on hers. And Seraphis smiled. Small, sad, but real. "Colonel Garrett Ashford," she said clearly, her voice carrying over the commotion. You are finally learning what these chains mean. They dragged him to a holding cell, and he went peacefully, feeling lighter than he had in years. The mission telemetry was accessible even from detention, routed through the base's general network. Garrett watched on a borrowed tablet as the transport docked with the asteroid station, as Seraphis made her way through the airlock and into the damaged equipment section. And when the visual feed showed her working, moving through zero gravity with impossible grace, he saw what he had hoped to see. The chains, still in place, still glowing, still part of her. She had chosen. The repair work should have been impossible. The equipment bay was a nightmare of failed machinery and unstable gravitational fields. Barely 3 feet of clearance in any direction. But Seraphis moved through it like a dancer, the chains extending in ways that defied physics, becoming tools and sensors and stabilizing braces. Then, 7 minutes into the repair sequence, something went wrong. The gravitational compensators failed completely. Seraphis was thrown against the bulkhead with force that registered on the impact sensors, alarms screaming across every monitor. The mission control channel erupted in panic, voices overlapping in desperate attempts to establish protocol. Representative down, showing significant trauma signatures. Medical team to standby. She needs to abort. Get her out of there. But Seraphis's voice came through the comm, strained and tight with pain, but absolutely steady. Negative. The repair is incomplete. If I abort now, the entire station will suffer cascade failure. 37 personnel will be lost. Your injuries are irrelevant. Garrett watched the bio readings, saw them spiking into dangerous ranges, watched her right wrist chain flicker, its glow stuttering like a failing heartbeat. Seraphis, he said into the comm link they had patched through to his cell, knowing she could hear him. You don't have to do this alone. I am not alone, Colonel. I wear the chains. They carry the strength of every vow I have made, every person I have chosen to protect. That is enough. It's too much. No one can hold that weight. A sound came over the comm that might have been laughter or might have been sobbing. These chains were designed to hold exactly this weight, to remind me that I am strong enough because I chose to be strong enough. That is their purpose. That has always been their purpose. The right wrist chain went dark completely. Seraphis, your chain, it's failing. No, her breathing was ragged now, each word an effort. It is not failing. It is being used for exactly what it was made for. One chain for 37 lives. That is a trade I accept. She worked for another 11 minutes, moving with visible pain, the remaining 3 chains glowing brighter as if compensating for the one that had gone dark. Every movement was agony written in biometric data, but her hands never shook, never hesitated. When she finally signaled completion, the equipment base stabilized, gravitational fields coming back online smoothly. The asteroid station was saved, 37 lives preserved, and Seraphis collapsed, unconscious before her body hit the deck. They brought her back to Edwards unconscious, med teams working frantically to stabilize vitals that fluctuated wildly. Garrett was released from detention by an order that came from so high up the chain of command that even General Vance couldn't countermand it, and he went straight to the medical bay, arriving just as they were transferring her to intensive care. Her right wrist chain was gone, not removed, destroyed. The metal had crystallized and shattered under the strain of whatever forces she had channeled through it. The bare skin beneath showed no scarring, but there was a ghostly outline where the chain had rested, like a tan line written in absence. She woke 3 hours later, and the first thing she did was reach for the missing chain, fingers grasping at empty air. The sound she made when her mind caught up with reality was a small, broken thing that hurt worse than any scream. Garrett was at her bedside instantly, catching her hand before she could damage the healing tissue. Easy. You're safe. You're back. Her eyes found his, weakened and lost. My chain, my vow, I broke it. You didn't break anything. You used it, exactly as it was meant to be used. You do not understand. Tears tracked down her skin, each one a small failure of the composure she had maintained so perfectly until now. That chain represented my loyalty to lineage, to family. Without it, I am incomplete. The vows are unbalanced. I am unbalanced. You saved 37 people. I broke my chain. He wanted to argue to convince her that sacrifice had meaning beyond the physical symbol, but before he could speak, the door to the medical bay opened. Three luminary entered, two wearing chains similar to Seraphis's, one older, unadorned. They moved with formal precision, and Garrett recognized ceremony when he saw it. The eldest spoke, her voice carrying harmonics that made his implant struggle. Seraphis, daughter of the seventh line, bearer of the oath chains, you have been witnessed. Seraphis tried to rise, managed only to push herself partially upright. Elder Lyria, I have failed. I broke my chain. I am unworthy. You are witnessed, Lyria repeated, and there was no anger in her voice, no judgment. Not for failure, for perfect completion. The first chain, loyalty to lineage, was given in service of protecting those who depend on alliance. 37 souls live because you honored that loyalty unto breaking. That is not failure, child. That is transcendence. I do not understand. Lyria stepped forward, produced from within her robes a chain of such intricate beauty that it made Seraphis's surviving three look simple by comparison. The chains are not eternal, Seraphis. They are meant to be used, worn, and when necessary, sacrificed. A chain that has never been tested has never truly served. You have proven the depth of your vows by breaking the physical symbol while maintaining the spiritual truth. She placed the new chain on Seraphis's wrist, and it bonded instantly, glowing with fierce brightness. This is the chain of witness sacrifice, worn only by those who have given everything and found they had more still to give. You have earned it through pain and service. Wear it with the same honor you showed the chain it replaces. Seraphis stared at the new chain, at the way it pulsed in perfect synchronization with the three that remained, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite healing, but the beginning of it. I am still worthy, she whispered, as if testing the words. You were always worthy, Lyria. I am, Lyria said gently. The chains do not make you so. They merely remind you of what you already are. The three luminary departed with the same formal precision they had arrived with, leaving Seraphis and Garrett alone in the medical bay's soft light. She looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that had been absent since Phoenix. Hope, fragile but real. You told me to choose myself, she said quietly. I did not understand what you meant until just now. I thought choosing myself meant keeping the chains, but it means honoring what the chains represent, even when the chains themselves are lost. The symbol can break. The meaning cannot unless I allow it to. You're stronger than any chain, Garrett said. You always were. And you, Colonel, what have you learned from all this? He looked at his hands, at the worn gold band on his left finger, and thought about vows that outlasted the people who received them, about commitments that shaped lives long after the original reasons had faded into memory. I've learned that freedom without purpose is just drift, that choosing your bonds is the most powerful thing a person can do, and that sometimes the greatest sacrifice is not dying for what you believe in, but living for it, day after day, even when no one's watching. Seraphis reached out, her four chains creating soft harmonics, and took his hand. The new chain pulsed warm against his skin, and he felt something pass between them that had no name in any language, human or luminary. Understanding, recognition, the knowledge that they had both been shaped by the chains they chose to wear, visible or invisible, and that the shaping had made them more, not less. Outside the window, the February sun was setting over the desert, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of the convictions they had fought so hard to claim. But tonight, in the quiet space between one breath and the next, they sat together. Two beings who had learned the hardest lesson the universe had to offer, that the strongest chains were the ones you forged yourself, and that breaking them in service of something greater was not failure. It was the whole point. March arrived with winds that scoured the desert clean, stripping away the softness of late winter and leaving only hard edges and unforgiving clarity. Seraphis recovered from her injuries with the methodical precision she brought to everything, pushing through rehabilitation exercises that left her trembling but never broken. The new chain on her right wrist gleamed with a different quality than the others, something deeper than mere reflection, as if it had been forged from compressed starlight rather than metal. Garrett watched her rebuild herself day by day and understood that he was witnessing something rare. Not recovery, but transformation. She moved differently now, carried herself with an awareness that went beyond the physical discipline he had come to expect. As if breaking the chain had cracked open something essential. Let light into spaces that had been sealed since she first took her vows at 20. They fell into a rhythm during those weeks, meeting each morning in the training facility before the base fully woke. She would perform her chain meditation while he ran through calisthenics that his aging body protested but accepted. And afterward, they would talk. Not about missions or protocols or the alliance politics that had caged them both, about meaning, about choice, about the weight of commitments made in youth and carried into maturity. "Do you regret it?" he asked one morning, watching her complete a sequence that made the chains sing in four-part harmony. Taking the vows when you did. Choosing chains at an age when most people are still figuring out who they are. Seraphis lowered her arms slowly, letting the chains settle against her skin. "I regret nothing, but I question everything. There is a difference. I don't follow." She moved to sit beside him on the training mat, close enough that he could see the fine details of the chain of witness sacrifice. The way its engraving seemed to shift and flow like liquid mathematics. "When I was 20, I believed the chains would define me, that wearing them would give me purpose and identity. I was not entirely wrong, but I was not entirely right either. The chains did not define me. I defined them through how I wore them, what I chose to do while bound by their weight. And now? Now I understand that the chains are a framework, not a foundation. They hold me together, yes. They remind me of my vows. But they are not the source of my strength. I am. I have always been." She touched the new chain with fingers that no longer trembled. "Breaking this taught me that. When the metal shattered, I thought I would shatter with it. Instead, I discovered that I was already whole. The chains were an expression of that wholeness, not its cause." Garrett nodded slowly, turning the concept over in his mind like a stone worn smooth by water. "I think I'm still learning that lesson. About the difference between what holds you together and what you mistake for holding you together." "The wedding ring," Seraphis said softly, her eyes going to his left hand. "The wedding ring," he agreed. "I tell myself I wear it to honor Margaret. And maybe that's partly true. But mostly I think I wear it because taking it off would mean accepting that she's gone, that the life we had is over, that I have to choose what comes next instead of just existing in the memory of what came before." "Choice is terrifying," Seraphis said. "It is easier to accept chains given to us than to forge our own. Easier to blame our bonds than to acknowledge we chose them freely and can choose differently if we find the courage." They sat in silence after that, two beings learning the same lesson in different languages, and the morning light coming through the high windows painted them both in shades of gold. The news came on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered through official channels with the cold efficiency of bureaucracy that dealt in lives like commodities. Another luminary war bride, stationed at a base in Texas, had made an announcement that rippled through the alliance like a shockwave through still water. Kiriel had removed her chains. The press conference was being broadcast across every military network, impossible to avoid even if Garrett had wanted to. He found Seraphis in her office, the small administrative space they had relegated her to, staring at a screen showing a luminary woman who looked eerily similar to her. Same skin that caught light like living jade, same elegant ears, same basic bone structure. But where Seraphis carried herself with coiled discipline, this woman seemed to vibrate with newfound freedom, movements loose and uncontained. "I am here today," Kyriel said, her voice pitched for maximum emotional impact, "to speak a truth that has been suppressed for too long. The tradition of oath chains is not honor. It is conditioning. It is generations of luminary women being taught that their worth comes from sacrifice, that binding themselves is somehow noble rather than tragic." Garrett saw Seraphis flinch, a microscopic movement that anyone else might have missed. "I wore chains for 7 years, Kiriel continued, holding up bare wrists for the cameras, skin unmarked and free. 7 years of telling myself I had chosen this path, that the weight I carried was meaningful. But removal has shown me the truth. I was a prisoner who had learned to love her cell. I was conditioned to call slavery freedom and believe it." The press erupted in questions, but Kiriel spoke over them, her voice rising with the fervor of the newly converted. I am free now, truly free. And I call on my sisters who still wear chains to question whether they chose them or were simply taught that choosing them was the only acceptable option. There is no honor in bondage, no matter how beautiful the chains. The broadcast ended. Seraphis sat perfectly still, her four chains motionless despite her breathing, and Garrett watched something crack in her expression, saw doubt seep in like poison through a hairline fracture. She's wrong, he said, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Is she? Seraphis's voice was barely above a whisper. How do I know? How do I know my choice was real and not just conditioning disguised as agency? I was raised in a culture that valorized chain wearing, taught from childhood that the highest honor was voluntary bondage. What if Kyrielle is right? What if I have been lying to myself for 8 years? You broke a chain to save lives. That's not the action of someone who was conditioned. Or it is the ultimate expression of conditioning. To sacrifice even the symbol of sacrifice. To give everything, even the giving. She stood abruptly, silver links creating discordant notes as she moved with unusual agitation. I need to think. I need to be alone. Seraphis. Please, Colonel. I have carried these chains with certainty since I was 20. I have defended them, bled for them, nearly died for them. If that certainty was false, if my choice was illusion, then I have built my entire identity on a foundation of lies. I need to know, and I cannot know while you stand there wanting me to be certain for your sake. The words hit like physical blows, but he recognized truth when he heard it. He nodded once and left, closing the door quietly behind him, giving her the solitude she needed even as every instinct screamed at him to stay. The days that followed were the darkest Garrett had witnessed since Margaret's final decline. Seraphis stopped attending morning training, stopped eating in the commissary. Her office door remained closed, and the few times he saw her in the corridors, she moved like a ghost. The chains dulled to lifeless gray, no longer glowing with internal light. He wanted to help, to fix this the way he had tried to fix things by removing her chains in those first days. But he had learned enough to know that this was not his battle to fight. This was Seraphis's crisis of faith, and she had to navigate it alone, had to find her own answers or live forever in the shadow of someone else's certainty. Still he watched. He made sure food appeared outside her door, made sure no one bothered her with administrative nonsense, made sure that when she was ready to emerge, there would be a world waiting that had space for whatever truth she had discovered in the darkness. On the 5th day, she came to his quarters after midnight, standing in his doorway like a specter, chains hanging loose and lifeless. I cannot know, she said without preamble. I have thought and meditated and examined every memory, every moment that led to my choice. And I cannot know with absolute certainty whether I chose the chains freely or whether I was conditioned to believe I was choosing freely. The answer is probably somewhere in between, tangled and complex and resistant to simple truth. Garrett sat up in bed, fully awake despite the hour. Then what do you do? I choose again, right now, in this moment, knowing everything I know, having broken and rebuilt, having served and sacrificed and questioned. She lifted her right wrist, looked at the chain of witness sacrifice with eyes that held ancient sorrow. I choose to keep wearing them, not because I wore them before, not because my culture expects it, not because you want me to or Kyrielle says I shouldn't, but because when I imagine my life without them, I feel incomplete. And that incompleteness is mine, my truth, not conditioning, not cultural pressure, mine. You're sure? I am not sure of anything except this. I would rather live authentically uncertain than hide behind false certainty. If there is even 1% chance I wear these chains because I was conditioned, I acknowledge that possibility and choose them anyway. Because the other 99% is me, Seraphis, warrior, and diplomat, in being who has defined herself through chosen limitation. And that is enough. She stepped into the room, and for the first time since Kyrielle's announcement, the chains began to glow again, soft and steady. But I need to do something first. I need to see her. I need to face the woman who named the doubt I was afraid to speak. I need to meet Kyrielle. They flew to Texas 3 days later on Garrett's personal time, and with his dwindling savings funding the civilian transport. Seraphis sat by the window watching the landscape scroll past below, and Garrett noticed she wore the chains differently now. Not hidden, not flaunted, but simply present. integrated into her being with the naturalness of breath. The Texas base was larger than Edwards, sprawling across flat terrain that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. Kiriel had agreed to meet them in a neutral space, a conference room in the visitors center where civilians sometimes toured to learn about the Alliance's work. She was waiting when they arrived, and seeing her face-to-face with Seraphis was like watching two versions of the same person diverge in real time. Kiriel wore civilian clothes, loose and comfortable, her movements unconstrained by the weight she had carried for 7 years. Her wrists were bare, skin smooth and unmarked, as if the chains had never existed. "Sister," Kiriel said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice despite the tension crackling in the air. "You came. You called me a prisoner," Seraphis replied, her tone neutral. "I thought that deserved a response in person. I called all of us prisoners, you, me, every war bride who was taught that chains were honor instead of horror." Kiriel gestured to a chair, and they sat, Garrett positioning himself slightly behind Seraphis, present but not intrusive. "I am not your enemy, Seraphis. I am trying to save you. I do not need saving." That is what every prisoner says when they have forgotten what freedom feels like. Kiriel leaned forward, earnest and desperate. "I thought the same thing. For 7 years, I told myself I had chosen my chains, that wearing them was meaningful, that the sacrifice was noble. But removing them showed me I had been living in a cage. I feel light now, unburdened, whole in ways I never knew I could be." "I am happy you found your freedom," Seraphis said carefully. "But your truth is not universal truth. My chains are not your chains. My choice is not your conditioning." "How can you know that? How can you be certain?" "I cannot be certain, not absolutely, but I can be authentic." Seraphis lifted her wrists, let the chains catch the light. "When you removed your chains, you felt liberated. When mine was destroyed in Nevada, I felt incomplete. When it was replaced, I felt whole again. That is my experience, my truth. It does not negate yours, but neither does yours negate mine." Kiriel shook her head, something like pity in her expression. "You are still trapped in the conditioning. You have been taught to interpret incompleteness as meaningful rather than recognize it as trauma. Stockholm Syndrome dressed up as spirituality." "Perhaps," Seraphis acknowledged, and Kiriel blinked in surprise at the admission. "Perhaps there is conditioning in my choice. Perhaps my culture shaped my understanding of freedom in ways I cannot fully recognize. But tell me, sister, do you believe your choice to remove the chains was free from conditioning? Did human culture not teach you that chains equal oppression? Did the media not reward your announcement with praise and validation? Did you not receive something from your choice just as I received something from mine?" Kiriel opened her mouth, closed it, something uncertain flickering in her eyes. "I am not saying your choice was wrong," Seraphis continued gently. "I am saying all choices are made within contexts that shape us. The question is not whether we are free from influence, but whether we can examine that influence and still claim our decisions as authentically ours. You chose to remove your chains, knowing your culture would praise you. I choose to keep mine, knowing mine will question me. Both choices are valid. Both are ours." Silence settled over the table, heavy with implications. "I thought I would feel whole," Kiriel said finally, her voice small and lost. "When I removed them, I thought I would feel complete. But I just feel undefined, like I removed the structure that was holding me together and did not realize I needed something to replace it with. I am free, yes, but I do not know what to do with the freedom." Garrett watched Seraphis's expression soften, saw compassion replace defensiveness. "Freedom without purpose is just drift. I learned that from a human colonel who thought he was teaching me about chains." She glanced back at him with a small smile. "The chains gave me purpose, structure, identity. And removing them took all of that away. You need to find what gives you those things now. It does not have to be chains, but it has to be something you choose, consciously and continuously. I do not know how." "Then learn, the way I am learning that chains can break and I remain whole. The way Colonel Ashford is learning that some commitments must be released before new ones can be chosen. We are all learning, Kriel. The difference is whether we learn in service of becoming who we truly are or who others expect us to be." They talked for another hour, trading stories of service and sacrifice, of the weight of expectations and the terror of choice. When they finally parted, Curiel's eyes were wet with tears, but something in her posture had straightened, as if she had found a beginning to the path that led beyond simply removing chains. On the flight back to Arizona, Seraphis was quiet, gazing out at the darkening sky. "You gave her something," Garrett said finally. "I gave her permission to be uncertain, the same permission I am learning to give myself." She touched the chains and they pulsed warm. "I do not know if I made the right choice wearing these. I only know it was my choice. Made and remade every day, that has to be enough. It's more than enough, it's everything." She turned from the window, met his eyes. "You are learning, Colonel. What will you do with that learning?" He looked down at the gold band on his finger, the ring he had worn for so long it had left a permanent indentation in his skin. "I think I need to make a choice, a real one. Not just accept the weight I was carrying, but decide if I want to keep carrying it. And I do not know yet, but I am learning that not knowing is okay, that I can sit in uncertainty and still move forward. That was never acceptable in the military. Everything had to be decisive, certain, clear. But life is not a military operation. It is messy and complicated and full of choices that do not have clean answers." "You sound like a luminary," Seraphis said, and there was warmth in her voice, something that might have been affection or might have been recognition of kinship. "Maybe I am learning to think like one. You have been an excellent teacher." But Seraphis fell quiet after that, her gaze returning to the window, something troubled in the set of her shoulders. Garrett recognized the quality of that silence, the kind that preceded difficult decisions. "There's something else," he said, not a question. She was quiet for a long moment, watching clouds scroll past below. "I need to be certain, not for Kyriel, not for you, for myself. I need to test whether I wear these chains because I need them or because I fear life without them." "What does that mean?" "It means I need 3 days alone, in a place where there are no expectations, no witnesses, no voices but my own." She turned to face him fully. "I need to go to Death Valley. I need to remove the chains completely and see who I am in their absence. And then I need to choose whether to put them back on." Garrett's stomach dropped. "That's dangerous. The desert, alone, without my crutches?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps, but if I cannot survive 3 days without them, then Kyriel was right. I am not free. I am dependent, and I need to know the difference. And if you don't come back, then assume I found my answer." She reached out, took his hand. "But I will come back, Colonel, one way or another. I promise you that." The pilgrimage began at dawn. Garrett drove her to the edge of Death Valley, the landscape opening before them in waves of stone and sand that seemed to stretch beyond the curve of the earth. Seraphis stood at the trailhead with a pack containing only water and the clothes she wore, chains gleaming in the early light. 3 days, she said. "If I do not return by sunset on the 3rd day, send someone to find me." That's not funny. It was not meant to be. But her eyes held warmth despite the words. "Trust me, Colonel. One last time." He watched her walk into the desert until she was just a shimmer of green and silver against the sand, then returned to the base camp and waited. Day 1, she walked until the base camp was invisible behind her, until there was nothing but stone and sky and heat that pressed down like divine judgment. She found a sheltered outcrop as the sun reached its zenith and removed the chains. All 4 of them. She laid them on the stone in careful order. Right wrist, right ankle, left ankle. The chain of witness sacrifice gleamed brightest, its engraving seeming to pulse even without contact with her skin. She sat cross-legged before them, studying her bare wrists and ankles, the ghost-pale skin that had not seen direct sun in 8 years. The first hour was liberation. She felt light, unburdened, capable of flight. The second hour brought uncertainty. Her hands moved restlessly, seeking weight that was no longer there. By the 3rd hour, she was weeping, though whether from relief or loss she could not say. Day 2, she left the chains where they lay and walked deeper into the valley, testing herself without them. She climbed rocks with bare hands, moved through narrow passages without the chain's tactical assistance, sat in meditation as the sun tracked overhead and felt her heartbeat echo in the emptiness where the chain's pulse used to synchronize. She was capable, competent, whole, but she was also less. Not diminished, but simplified, like a symphony reduced to a single instrument. Still music, still beautiful, but missing harmonics she had not realized she valued until their absence rang loud in the silence. Day 3, she returned to the outcrop at dawn, sat before the chains, and asked herself the only question that mattered. Who am I without these bonds? The answer came not in words but in sensation. She was Seraphis, warrior, diplomat, sister who had chosen sacrifice, woman who had learned that breaking could lead to stronger healing. She was all of these things with or without the chains. But the chains were also part of who she had chosen to become. They were the language she had learned to speak, the framework she had built her strength within, and she could choose that language, that framework, knowing now that she was not imprisoned by it. She placed the right wrist chain back on with hands that did not shake, spoke the vow in luminary, and felt it settle into place like coming home. One by one, she restored them. And when the last lock engaged, when all 4 chains pulsed in synchronization with her heart, she smiled. Not because she needed them, but because she wanted them. And in that wanting, freely acknowledged and consciously chosen, she found the certainty that had eluded her since Cariel's announcement. She was not conditioned. She was not imprisoned. She was Seraphis, who wore chains because wearing them made her more fully herself. Garrett was waiting when she emerged from the desert on the evening of the 3rd day, dusty and sunburned but radiating a calm that went bone deep. "You came back," he said, relief obvious in his voice. "I never left. I just went to meet myself without pretense." She showed him the chains, glowing steady and strong, and I chose to return with these. Not because I fear life without them, but because life with them is the life I want to live. "You're sure?" "I am sure that I am choosing. That is the only certainty any of us ever truly has." He nodded, understanding in a way he couldn't have even weeks ago. They drove back to Edwards in comfortable silence, and Garrett found himself thinking about his own chains, visible and invisible, and what it would mean to choose them consciously rather than simply carrying them out of habit. April came with wildflowers blooming in impossible profusion across the desert, color erupting from hard-scrabble soil like defiance made botanical. The Alliance, shaken by Kyriel's very public removal, and Seraphis's equally public defense of her choice, had reversed their policy regarding chain visibility. War brides could now wear their chains openly or not, as they individually chose, without fear of administrative punishment or public censure. It was a small victory, hard won, but it felt monumental. Garrett had been officially reinstated to active duty, his reprimand quietly removed from his record by someone high enough in the command structure to make such things disappear. General Vance had even offered something that might have been an apology, though it was couched in language about necessary policy adjustments and evolving understanding of cultural integration. Seraphis had been offered a new position, Official Alliance Cultural Ambassador, with full operational authority and a mandate to teach both humans and Luminary about the complexities of choice, tradition, and the space where they intersected. She had accepted with the calm grace she brought to everything, though Garrett noticed she wore the chain of witness sacrifice a little more prominently now, as if she wanted people to ask about it, to learn its story. 2 weeks later, Seraphis stood before her first class of Alliance personnel, human and luminary mixed, teaching the philosophy of chosen bonds. Garrett sat in the back row, no longer wearing a wedding ring, but carrying Margaret's memory in the way he lived rather than what he wore. The class asked questions, some respectful, some challenging, some openly skeptical. Seraphis answered each with patience, and when a young human lieutenant asked, "But how do you know you're really free?" she smiled. "I know because I chose these chains yesterday, and I will choose them again tomorrow, and the day after that. Freedom is not a destination. It is a practice, daily, exhausting, essential work." After class, she found Garrett in the corridor. "Walk with me." They climbed to the base's highest observation point, the place where the desert stretched to the horizon and the sky seemed infinite. The chains caught the afternoon light, and Garrett thought about how he had first seen them as prison and now recognized them as poetry written in silver. "I received word from Kyriel," Seraphis said quietly. "She has begun training as a mediator, helping other war brides who are questioning their choices in either direction. She says our conversation gave her purpose beyond simply removing chains. That's good. That's really good. And you, have you found your purpose beyond the uniform? Garrett considered the question, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of promise. I think I'm learning that purpose isn't something you find once and keep forever. It's something you choose, the way you choose your chains. Daily, consciously, I choose to be here. I choose to learn. I choose to honor the past without being imprisoned by it. Tomorrow I might choose the same things or I might choose differently, but they'll be my choices. Seraphis reached out, took his hand in hers, the chains cool against his skin. You have become wise, Colonel Garrett Ashford. I had a good teacher. They stood in silence as the day began its transformation into evening, and Garrett felt the weight of a decision he had been carrying settle into clarity. I need to do something, he said. Will you witness it? Always. They drove to the Grand Canyon as the sun began its descent, the light turning the ancient stone into layers of fire and shadow. This was the place where he had scattered Margaret's ashes 3 years ago, the place where grief had felt like it would consume him whole. Now it felt different, not less sacred, but less suffocating. A place of memory rather than a shrine to what could never be again. He stood at the overlook, Seraphis beside him, and pulled the gold ring from his finger. The metal was warm from years of contact with his skin, worn smooth in places from unconscious touching during moments of stress or contemplation. I loved her, he said, not to Seraphis, but to the canyon, to the wind, to whatever remained of Margaret in the world. I loved her completely, and when she died, I thought keeping this ring on meant keeping her alive somehow, keeping us alive. Seraphis said nothing, just stood beside him, the familiar percussion of her bonds providing gentle accompaniment. But I understand now that the ring is not Margaret. It is not our marriage. It is a symbol, and symbols only have the meaning we give them. I can honor her memory without wearing this. I can carry what we had without letting it become a chain that prevents me from choosing what comes next. He closed his fist around the ring, felt its familiar weight one last time. Then he opened his hand and let it fall, watched it arc down into the canyon, disappearing into shadow and distance. I thought that would hurt more, he said quietly. Pain and necessity are not always proportional, Seraphis replied. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that bring the most relief once made. He turned to her, this being who had taught him more about freedom and commitment than 20 years of military service ever had. What comes next for you? I will teach. I will serve. I will wear these chains every day and question them every night, because that is what choosing truly means. Not deciding once and never reconsidering, but recommitting continuously, consciously, authentically. She touched the chain of witness sacrifice. And when the time comes to break another chain, I will break it knowing that I am more than the symbols I wear, that the chains enhance who I am, but do not define it. That sounds like wisdom. That sounds like work. Daily exhausting work, but meaningful work. The kind that shapes a life worth living. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the canyon in shades of gold and crimson, Seraphis turned to him with an expression of such clarity it took his breath away. You asked me once what comes next, she said. I ask you the same now. What will you choose, Colonel Garrett Ashford? What chains will you forge for yourself? He thought about it, really thought, watching the light play across ancient stone. I choose to keep learning, to keep questioning, to build commitments consciously rather than accepting them by default. Maybe I'll find new bonds that matter as much as the old ones. Maybe I won't, but I'll know they're mine. Then you have learned everything I could teach you. She held out her hand, chain singing softly. Walk with me into whatever comes next. He took her hand without hesitation. The metal was warm against his skin, pulsing with her heartbeat, and he felt in that touch a promise. Not of certainty or easy answers or freedom from doubt, but of companionship in the questioning, of shared commitment to living authentically even when authenticity was hard. They stood together as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, watching the canyon fill with shadow. Behind them, the base waited with its routines and responsibilities. Ahead, the future stretched uncertain and demanding, full of decisions that would need to be made again and again. But they would make those decisions together. Two beings who had learned that freedom was not the absence of chains, but the power to forge your own and wear them with pride. Seraphis's chains caught the last light and sang their quiet song, and Garrett understood finally what they had been saying all along. This is who I am. This is who I choose to be. And in that choosing, I am free. The sunset painted them both in gold, and they turned together toward whatever came next, carrying their commitments with pride, wearing their choices with honor, living their freedom one deliberate decision at a time. In the distance, lights from the base twinkled like earthbound constellations. Seraphis would stand before her next class tomorrow, teaching Alliance personnel about the philosophy of chosen bonds. Curiel would continue her work in Texas, helping other war brides find their own paths. And Garrett would wake each morning and choose, consciously and deliberately, how to spend the day, what commitments to honor, what new bonds to forge. They walked back to the transport together, metal whispering against metal with each of Seraphis's steps, creating music from commitment, harmony from choice. The night deepened around them, vast and full of stars, and somewhere in that darkness were answers they had not yet found, questions they had not yet learned to ask. But they had time. They had choice. They had each other, and the understanding that the strongest bonds were the ones you chose to wear. That was enough. That was everything.